Today, before my strength and conditioning class, I listened to a podcast, the Raw Pacey or Pacey Perform podcast with Dan Baker from Australia. And one of the things that Baker said that I found interesting was he was talking about, I believe it was AFL, maybe it was rugby league or rugby union in Australia, but he was talking about the importance of the, age 14 to age 21 years for physical development, because once the players reach a professional level around age 22, it's hard to make them a better athlete. So he basically said that once they reach that level, they kind of are what they are physically. And I don't know why that is, whether it's because, I don't know, the nature of the sport or duration of the season, something like that. But it's an interesting perspective. And if we apply it to basketball, there is a very short off season for the NBA. If the season ends in June and we're hitting training camp, at the end of September, there's not a ton of time to recover from the long season and then to really develop, a lot of athletic development during the off season. There's certainly time for some, and definitely some players will develop more than others during the off season, but it's a fairly short period of time, especially compared to the length of the season. And the travel and the number of games and so forth during the course of a season makes it difficult to really do a ton of athletic development throughout the season. Just because of the schedules and demands of the game, so on and so forth. So if we look at that and say, well, okay, players are entering the NBA at 19, 20 years old. That time from 14 years old to 19 to 20 year old becomes really pivotal for an athletic development standpoint. And Baker was talking about he has a long-term athlete development model for that period of time where they go through 5 steps, and starting at the youngest ages, really focusing on movement and movement competency. And so if we look at it from that perspective, are we giving future professional athletes or future professional college players the best physical development during that 14 to 18 year old years, and then during their beginning of their college years? And with the combination of AAU, high school, and private basketball coaches, it's probably taking away from the physical development. And when we look at the number of injuries now in the NBA and reflect on it, this could be one of the pivotal conclusions that we could potentially make. Reflecting what Baker said is, if the pivotal years for athletic development are 14 to 19, and we're not doing a great job of developing in a long-term process from developing the really strong movement capacity, and then eventually at 19, 20 really loading those movements and developing high force, high power, high velocity movements, in a progressive over a period of 5 or 6 years time frame. And instead we're rushing that development and we're jumping from one private trainer to another, or maybe we're working with a high school coach who doesn't have a background in strength and conditioning, or we're working with an AAU coach who is trying to do plyometrics but doesn't even know what plyometrics are. Things like this, we might be shortchanging the development, especially by going after immediate performance goals, or how high can I jump, at 14 years old, or how much can I lift at 15 years old, as opposed to worrying about how high can I jump, when I'm 20, 21, how strong am I at 20, 21. And by going after these more short-term goals and developing in a more congested competitive schedule, we may be predisposing players for injury when they do become professional athletes, because they don't have that deep foundation of athletic development. They didn't develop over a period of years. They tried to cram that development into a summer or one off season, or maybe 1 year with a college strength and conditioning coach, or maybe they had different types of training that was somewhat haphazard. But this could be one reason for injuries at the NBA level, and that's speculation. And obviously, every player is different because every player, at the 14 to 18 or 14 to 20-year-old age range, has developed with different coaches, different private coaches, different AAU coaches, and some are great, some are very informed, some put together great workouts in the weight room, off the weight room. Some do really, emphasize movement skills, but some don't. And so some players make it to, I work with college athletes, who have been in a college program and they still can't squat properly. So what was happening when they were in high school? Were they even lifting weights? I don't know. If they were lifting weights, what were they doing if they still can't do it correctly 3 or 4 years later? So they're just loading bad movements. That's not going to develop a robust or resilient athlete by loading poor movements patterns and really making those movement patterns or ingraining those movement patterns, consistently over time. So, this really struck me as an important concept. We talk about long-term athlete development and what that means and so on and so forth. But this idea that, from a movement standpoint, from a strength development, a power development, an overall athlete development standpoint, those years from 13 or 14 all the way to, 19, 20 when we're hitting the beginning of college and then moving on to the NBA, are pivotal in terms of developing, athletic skills, strength, movement competency. And if we're rushing through that period or ignoring basic movement competency in that period because somebody can already jump high, so we think that they're athletic, but maybe they can't decelerate at all, so they're hurting their knees every time they're jumping to dunk because they can't decelerate on landing. And so now they're already starting to have jumper's knee or tendonitis when they're in high school because of the pounding they're put on because they don't know how to decelerate force. And so even when they get into college and then if they make the NBA, now they've already got bad knees before they even really start their NBA career. So I think more attention needs to be placed on what we're doing to help these basketball players athletically, and not just worrying about short-term performance in terms of seeing how high they can jump or how much they can squat or deadlift or bench, but making sure that we're developing the movements first, and taking a gradual approach over a period of 5 or 6 years before we're really focused on weight room numbers or combine numbers. But instead, we're tending to start these combine type tests earlier and earlier and trying to test 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds to see what their vertical jumps are or see how much they can lift or how fast they can run. And they don't have the basic movement competency to do these things well. So we're going after numbers at too early of an age and not allowing that long-term athlete development to develop these skills over time before we put a lot of load or velocity or force into the movements. So these years are pivotal, and we probably need to emphasize these years and the athlete development through the period of these years even more than we're doing at this point.